Hello, you've reached S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about Bart Ehrman. You're in my series called Bart's Blunders. This is the third video I've made on Bart's Blunders, and I keep finding more and more. So it's lots of area for debate and discussion and video rebuttals and that. So Bart is providing all kinds of information, which is pretty excellent. So in this particular video, I'm going to discuss a portion of Bart's arguments that he made in a debate with Mike Licona. Mike Licona is a Houston Baptist University professor who's a Christian apologist. Bart Ehrman is a professor up at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. He is an agnostic. He says he was raised as a Christian, and then when he went into school later in life, I think he was in his college years, he decided to drop Christianity and become an agnostic. And since then, he's written dozens and dozens of books, and he's been making lots and lots of money because he's rather popular. He's got an opinion that many people don't appreciate, but of course, there's a contingent of people who find him completely entertaining and they love his work. And so here we're going to see a portion of his argument on the idea that the Bible has a lot of contradictions. So here we go.
It is interesting that both the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of John tell you exactly the day on which Jesus died. It was sometime around the Passover feast when Jews would celebrate the Passover, the Exodus from Egypt, by having a lamb slaughtered in the temple on the day of preparation for the Passover. You prepare the Passover meal, which involves eating lamb that night. The lambs get slaughtered on the day of preparation, and that night is when the next day begins in Jewish reckoning. The night's the next day. When it gets dark, that's when the day begins in Jewish reckoning. So in all the Gospels, Jesus dies sometime around there somewhere. In John's Gospel, John is clear. Jesus dies on the day that they are preparing to eat the Passover, the day before the Passover meal is eaten. Mark's Gospel is also explicit. Jesus dies the day after the Passover meal is eaten. You don't need to take my word for it. Look it up. Mark chapter 14, verse 12, and then Mark chapter 15, verse 25. It's the day after the meal was eaten. John chapter 19, verse 14. It was the day before the meal was eaten. They're explicit, both of them. But how can it be both? Now you might say, look, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, he died sometime around there, fine. Okay, but it actually matters to John and it matters to Mark. It matters to John because John is our only gospel that says that Jesus is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. John is the only gospel that says that, and he has Jesus killed exactly when the lambs are being killed.
Okay, so let me go ahead and address these points that he made. I had written a blog a while back, and I've been investigating this for a while, and I'll say a lot of credit for some of the ideas that I'm going to have with respect to the dating come from Harold Hayner, who's a person who's published a book in 1977, and that book is one of the ones that I like to reference quite frequently. It was a dark day when Jesus was crucified. One can only imagine the immense pain and despair that his family, friends, and apostles felt as they watched the torture and apparent death of our Savior. The intention of this video is to develop a better understanding of some of the occurrences that happened on that day by matching biblical and extra-biblical historical evidence. The four Gospels state that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate, who was the governor of Judea from 26 to 36 AD, and during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, according to Tacitus. This gives us a window of time on the year of Jesus' crucifixion. We also have information concerning the day of the week in which the crucifixion occurred. All four Gospels agree that Jesus was crucified on the day of preparation. Matthew 27:62, Mark 15:42, Luke 23:54, and John 19:14, 31, and 42. In John 19:25-31, he states, "Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, 'Woman, here is your son,' and to the disciple, 'Here is your mother.' From that time on, the disciple took her into his home. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, 'I am thirsty.' A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of hyssop plant, lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, he said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath. Mark, Luke, and John state that the following day was the Sabbath. The day of preparation for the Sabbath always falls on a Friday, according to Mark 15:42. John states that it was the day of preparation of the Passover. John 18:28 says, "Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the place of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover." John's statement leads one to carefully examine the Last Supper as the Passover meal. Matthew 26:17-29, Mark 14:12-25, Luke 22:7-22, and John 13:1-30 all report these. In 1 Corinthians 5:7, we learn that Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. The sacrifice of the lambs in the original Passover signified that those partaking of that sacrifice would be spared from God's judgment. According to Hayner, the Galilean method of reckoning the timing of the Passover runs from sunrise to sunrise. So using the Galilean method, Nisan 14 began at sunrise on Thursday, and Nisan 15 began at sunrise on Friday. The Galilean method was used by the Pharisees, and the Synoptics used this reckoning. John used the Judean method of reckoning, in which Nisan 14 began at sunset on Thursday night and ended at sunset on Friday night. The Judean method was used by the Sadducees. The Synoptic reckoning places the slaughter of the Passover lamb on Thursday between 3 and 5 p.m., while the Judean reckoning places the slaughter of the Passover lamb on Friday between 3 and 5 p.m. According to Hayner on page 88, 9, and 90, he says, "Here may be a case in point where neither party compromised, and so there were 2 days of Passover slaughter." In other words, we've rebutted that portion of Bart's argument. These differences can also help to explain what appear to be discrepancies in the timing of Jesus' appearance before Pontius Pilate, as reported in Mark 15:25 and John 19:14. Mark's day used a Jewish 24-hour time period, so the third hour when Jesus was crucified was 3 hours after the morning began at 6 a.m. John's day used the Roman time period, so the 6th hour when Jesus appeared before Pilate would be 6 hours after midnight at 6 a.m. Taken together, the Gospels report that Jesus appeared before Pilate around 6 a.m. He was crucified at 9 a.m., and darkness appeared between noon and 3 p.m. when he died. He was buried on that Friday. In the larger context, these findings indicate the apostles ate the Last Supper on Thursday, followed by the crucifixion of Jesus on Friday, the Sabbath Saturday, and the discovery of the empty tomb on Sunday by Mary Magdalene and other women. Just as Jesus had predicted in John 2:19 and Mark 14:58, he rose on the third day. The crucifixion fulfilled the scriptures such as Isaiah 53, which was written around 700 years before. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Interestingly, Isaiah is the only book that's fully preserved in the Bible to be found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now we'll turn to the particulars that occurred on the day of preparation when Jesus was crucified to better pinpoint the week and year. According to Mark 15:33, at noon darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Mark 15:37-39 continues, "With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, 'Surely this man was the Son of God.'" Luke 23:44-45 states, "It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out in a loud voice, 'Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.' When he had said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, 'Surely this was a righteous man.'" Matthew 27:45 says, "From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, 'Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani,' which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:50-52 continues, "And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rock split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified, and they exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." According to the prophet Joel, which is recounted by Luke in Acts 2, 15-21, in the last days God says, "I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. I will show wonders in the heavens above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and glorious days of the Lord. And everyone calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." There's some other evidence that on the day of the crucifixion, the sun was darkened and or the moon appeared like blood. The so-called report of Pilate, a New Testament apocryphal fragment, you can reference this in more detail from Deliso and Fidani in 2014, from the 4th century states, Jesus was delivered to him by Herod, Archelaus, Philip, Annas, Caiaphas, and all the people. At his crucifixion, the sun was darkened, the stars appeared, and in all the world people lighted lamps from the 6th hour till evening. The moon appeared like blood. Thales is a relatively unknown pagan author who also cited darkness during the crucifixion, as reported by both him and Africanus. As expected, however, some pagans did reject the reports, including people like Origen, Jerome, and Chrysostom. Scholars have reported that devastating earthquakes occurred in Jerusalem during Christ's death. See Mallet 1853 and Rigg 1941. This occurred in a region that includes the Dead Sea Fault, which is a plate boundary that separates the Arabian Plate and the Sinai subplate, according to Garfinkel, 1981. This fault has been active since the Miocene, according to Kagan and colleagues, 2011, and the fault is still active today, according to Deliso and Fidani, 2014. The fault extends from the Red Sea in the south to the Taurus Mountains in the north. Kagan and colleagues analyzed seismites in the Holocene Dead Sea Basin by constructing 2 age-depth chronological models based on atmospheric radiocarbon ages of short-lived organic debris with a Bayesian model. Seismites are sedimentary beds and structures which are deformed by seismic shaking. The scholars analyzed seismites in different areas of the basin, finding that several synchronous seismites appeared in all sections during particular years, including 33 AD. Other years in which earthquakes occurred as evidenced by seismites are 1927, 1293, 1202, 1212, 749, 551, 419, 33, 31 BC, and mid-century BC. After analyzing laminated sedimentary cores recovered at the shores of the Dead Sea, Migowski and colleagues in 2004 also confirmed an earthquake in 33 with a magnitude of 5.5. They documented earthquakes around 33 AD and 31 BC and 76 AD. The scholars analyzed seismites using radiocarbon dating. Ben Menahem in 2014 conducted a literature review of empirical studies over 4,000 years of seismicity along the Dead Sea Rift. The scholar referenced the aforementioned studies, along with one by Enzel and colleagues in 2000, before concluding that earthquakes occurred in Masada in 31 BC, Jerusalem in 33 AD, and near Nablus in 64 AD. In summary, the literature on seismicity along the Dead Sea Basin supports the assertion that an earthquake occurred either in or very close to the year 33 AD. As noted, the Bible indicates that Jesus was crucified on Friday, the day of preparation, which some scholars have determined is Nisan 14. See Humphreys and Waddington, 1985. During the time period in which Pontius Pilate served as governor, the only 2 possibilities in which Nisan 14 fell on a Friday occurred on April 7th in 30 AD and April 3rd in 33 AD. To determine when Nisan 14 fell on a Friday, Humphreys and Waddington reconstructed a 1st century Jewish calendar using astronomical calculations. To determine which date is appropriate, we refer to John 2:20. They replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you are going to raise it in 3 days?" But the temple he had spoken of was his body. Assuming this refers to the inner temple, according to Hayner in 1977, the date in which the Jews made this statement would be between 30 and 31 AD. If the only Passovers that occurred during Jesus' ministry are the 3 to which John referred in his gospel, The 33 AD date suggests a ministry of about 2.5 years. Some scholars indicate an additional unmentioned Passover, which would add a year to Jesus' ministry. Either way, Humphreys and Waddington determined that 33 is the most appropriate, most likely. Yet note by Humphreys and Waddington's and others' calculations, Nisan 14, which fell on Friday, April 3rd and 33, is also the day in which Passover is celebrated, consistent with the Gospel of John, who said that the Jewish leaders wanted to avoid ceremonial uncleanness on Passover. Passover is likely to have fallen on the Friday when Jesus was crucified. And again, if you look at different timings, you'll see that Passover would have started on Friday night. That would indicate that Jesus recognized Passover as part of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread week, at the Last Supper as a Passover lamb. Such assertions are consistent with others who have also come up with that. And others have also found the 33 date to be appropriate. Humphreys and Waddington further state, and here's, I'm quoting, "The moon turned to blood is a graphic description of a lunar eclipse. The reason an eclipsed moon is blood red is well known, and the effect has been well documented. Even though during an eclipse the moon is geometrically in the Earth's shadow, some sunlight still reaches it by the refraction of light passing through the Earth's atmosphere. This light is red since it has traversed a long path through the atmosphere and scattering by air molecules and very small particles preferentially removes the blue end of the spectrum. The combination of scattering and refraction produces the deep blood red color of a lunar eclipse." The moon turned to blood has been used by writers and historians to describe lunar eclipses for many centuries, and the expression dates back to at least 300 BC. Descriptions of some well-documented ancient eclipses have been compiled by Ginzel and matched with calculated eclipse dates. We quote 3 examples, and again, I'm still quoting from Humphreys and Waddington. 1, the lunar eclipse of 20 September 331 BC occurred 2 days after Alexander crossed the Tigris, and the moon was described by Curtius IV as suffused with the color of blood. 2, the lunar eclipse of 31 August 8304, probably, which occurred at the martyrdom of Bishop Felix, was described in Acta Sanctorum. When he was about to be martyred, the moon was turned to blood. 3, the lunar eclipse of 2nd March, AD 462, was described in the Hydatius Limicus Chronicon, thus one, on March 2nd, with the crowing of cocks after the setting of the sun. The full moon was turned to blood. Humphreys and Waddington compiled ancient Babylonian eclipse records between 26 and 36 AD. A lunar eclipse with a 60% magnitude was recorded on Friday, April 3rd, 33 AD, at the rising moon, which was visible from Jerusalem. This timing and Humphreys and Waddington's detailed analysis of Jerusalem's sun-moon coordinates suggests that the lunar eclipse occurred in the early evening of the crucifixion. Scholars further believe that the daytime darkness, which occurred during the crucifixion, was the result of a Khamsin dust storm. See Driver 1965 and the Sibylline Oracles 111. Thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. I hope you're enjoying these videos, and I hope you enjoy this series. I plan to continue more videos and in this series on Bart's Blunders, so I hope you'll tune in again. I also hope you'll be sure to share some of this information, chats, links to the chats with friends. I am going to link a blog. I'm going to create a blog with the same information that I just provided so that you have references to all of the references that I provided today. So I gave you a number of different references. You can like me. I mean, you can please like and subscribe. I hope you like me. You can like and subscribe. Please come again. You can also find me on Twitter at LEAD1225, or you can find me at Christian-apologist.com. Thank you, and have a great one.